All right, let's dive in. I don't love that you guys are cloaked in darkness, but it is what it is. I'm going to pace a lot, so don't worry. I've only fallen off the stage once, and it's not a very high stage. So let me just dive in. About a year and a half ago, I went to a conference that had a fantastic title. It was called Transformative AI, the economics of transformative AI. What is transformative AI? The conference posed a provocative question. What if we succeed? What did they mean? They meant transformative AI is the incredibly ambitious goal that if we can build algorithms that can do what people can, completely do what a person can do. What if we could succeed at that? Just imagine, take a doctor. Doctors read EKGs, MRIs, X-rays. Imagine an algorithm that could do all of that. Imagine an algorithm that could do call center work, an algorithm that can handle meeting scheduling. A friend of mine had this story once where she was communicating with a famous, author, and the author put her off to the assistant to find a time to meet, and she was very friendly to the assistant, being really, really friendly. And she finally got on the phone call with the author. And it turned out the assistant was just an AI, and she had just wasted all this time being incredibly friendly to some bot. But imagine that could happen. Imagine data analysis. Someone who goes through and does all the data. Maybe you could just ask a question and all the data analysis. Imagine coding. What if we succeed? So the question that was being posed at this conference is, here we are in 2024. Flash forward a little bit, and we end up with the future where algorithms can do what people can. What will be the future of work? What will be the future of society? Let's dream, and let's dream big, and let's look to the future. That's what the conference was about. What I want to do a little bit is to do something different right now. I want to look back. I want to look back to 1970. Come on, that was impressive. That took me at least an hour. Should we do that again? All right, that's fine. I see you guys are not impressed. I want to look back to 1973. In 1973, March, Scientific American, a month before I was born, had a very interesting article. The article was about animal locomotion, okay? It's about how efficient are animals at moving around. How many kilocalories per kilometer to move a kilogram of mass? You're probably impressed that Americans know what these things are. I am too. I think maybe it's because it's a scientific magazine. And what they did is they put a figure in that magazine. It was a figure that graphed by mass of animal, body weight, efficiency on the y-axis. Now, you'll notice some things that are interesting here. It turns out that mice are not very efficient at all. Those little critters, they annoy us, but they're not very good at getting around. People, somewhat efficient, somewhere in the middle. Salmon, very efficient. Now, what made this figure interesting, the rest of the talk is me going through data point by data point, so just settle in, people. You're going to hear about glowflies in a second. No, that's not the rest of the talk. What made this figure interesting is a point on this figure that is an outlier, a point that is not, properly speaking, an animal. If you look closely at it, you could see it. The most efficient thing on this chart is man on bicycle. It's kind of amazing that people are not very efficient, but people riding bicycles are very efficient. The reason I'm showing this figure is that this figure, though it's about animal locomotion, has gone on to enter the folklore of computer science. It's entered the folklore of computer science because a very famous technologist looked at this figure and said, this is what computing should be. It should be building bicycles for the mind. I would tell you who that person is, but then I'd have to say Steve Jobs, and then you'd say, oh, he's just quoting Steve Jobs. But in fact, it was Steve Jobs who made this, I think, quite brilliant observation. Computers should be bicycles for the mind. Why am I telling you this? We have such two different views of computing you've now heard. In one view, we've said, imagine an algorithm that can do what people can. Automation. The other view that said, imagine computers as bicycles that let our minds go to places we couldn't imagine, take us places, do things with it. This talk works much better in the Netherlands, but whatever, we'll just keep pushing forward. These views are fundamentally different, and I want you to reflect on these two views. To do that, I'm going to take a very concrete problem and walk you through. So, there is something called sudden cardiac death. Sudden cardiac death is something that happens disproportionately to men, and they just sort of keel over one day, dead. Sort of electrical problems of the heart, suddenly they die. Now, it would be really useful to find out to whom this is going to happen, because we can install a pacemaker and save lives. Well, we have a way of looking at the electrical functioning of the heart. This is an EKG. It produces, you put leads on places like that. Many of you have probably had an EKG. If you haven't, maybe you should go get one. Or you're just very young. But this is what an EKG produces, waveforms of the heart. So the question is, can we use an algorithm to address this problem of sudden cardiac death? Can we look at the EKG and understand, who's at risk? How would you do it? Well, you would take a large data set of EKGs, you would build this a convolutional network, you would build an algorithm, a deep learning algorithm, that would process this data. And in the world where we're automating, it's clear how we would process it. This data would come with a bunch of labels that says, in this EKG, this is what the doctor sees, in this EKG, this is what the doctor sees, and you would train this algorithm to automate clinical judgment. The good news, by one measure, is we have now gotten so good at this activity that we can, in fact, build algorithms that do this extremely well, that replicates cardiologists. In fact, to the point where they do better than cardiologists because they get rid of the noise that humans have when they look at things. Pretty striking. Unfortunately, there is bad news. It does very badly at finding sudden cardiac death. Why does it do badly at finding sudden cardiac death? Because it can only do as well as cardiologists can. And we just don't know that much about what causes sudden cardiac death. So the ceiling of this algorithm is fundamentally limited by our current clinical knowledge. Sudden cardiac death is a medical mystery. Many people die where when we go back and look at their EKGs, doctors agree that EKG looks normal. Maybe there's no signal in the EKG. Maybe we need another measurement tool. Who knows? It's a medical marvel. How would we do it if we were to try and take the same problem and approach it as a bicycle for the mind? Well, as a bicycle for the mind, what we'd have to say is, don't tell me what I already see in the X-ray. I can get there with my own mind and the EKG. I can get there. Take me places I couldn't. So let's build a different algorithm. Let's not automate clinical judgment. Let's actually get a data set where we say this person had this EKG and they had sudden cardiac death, this person did not. Now we're going to predict the actual outcome, not what we think, but what nature drew. Now there's a possibility that algorithms can discover something that we didn't know, a possibility that this bicycle can take us to an unimagined place for a problem that we can all agree matters. And that's what we did. We got a bunch of death certificate data from Sweden, had a huge sample that we were able to then build such an algorithm. And I'll skip some of the details. In essence, what the algorithm does is it finds about 7% of people who have extremely high risk. What do I mean by high risk? High risk is that it's more than high enough for us to give a pacemaker. These are all people that humans looking at these EKGs cannot see anything, but the algorithm reliably finds a problem that we can now put a pacemaker in and save lives. To me, that is the fundamental difference between automation and bicycles. Automation has a ceiling of human understanding. Bicycles, the only ceiling is in the creativity of asking questions. If you believe we have come to understand the world around us, and the only thing we need left to do is to automate that knowledge, the left side is for you. But if you believe there are many mysteries, many things we have yet to learn, many things we have yet to discover, many advances to be had, I believe the right side is for you, and that feeling of computing is what we need. It is also very different to build a bicycle than to build automation. Automation is quite demanding. The bar is high. You have to build an algorithm that gets everything right before you can automate. Everything has to be right. On the other hand, the bar is low. I'm not telling you I've understood all of sudden cardiac death. I've just said we found something we didn't know before. Let's understand what that is. Let's make sense of it. Let's now start doing animal studies. We just need to get some insight. Let me give you another example of this. Well, this is work we've done in the criminal justice system in the United States. So every year in the United States, there are about 12 million arrests. That's a shocking number for a country with 250 million people, 280 million people. The US is extremely good at one thing, arresting people. Right after arrest, there is a question that a judge must answer. Should the defendant wait at home or wait in jail for the trial? It's a pretty important question since most jurisdictions, we end up having, if jailed, the defendant can stay for about 2 to 3 months in jail. So it's a pretty consequential thing. What we did in this context is we built an algorithm that asked the question, can we improve on judicial decision-making? And it turns out you can improve on judicial decision. You can actually help the judge choose better, not by a little, but by a lot. So to calibrate it, you can keep crime rates fixed and reduce jail populations by 40%. So you can get the same level of crime with 60% of the people in jail. You can basically close jails in July. And you can reduce racial disparities. But let's go further. What is the judge getting wrong? Why are they making this mistake? Not can algorithms improve judicial making, but why can algorithms improve judicial decision making? Now you notice what we can do. So far the camera has been on the person that's dying, the defendant, the risk, but now let's turn the camera on the decision maker and ask how do they decide. Let's build a predictive model of the judge. When you do that, you get something quite striking. I'm now going to tell you the top 5 things to predict whether the judge will jail somebody, okay? The 5th most important thing is whether the person's current charge is a drug crime. The 4th most important thing is whether the current charge is a felony crime. The 3rd, property crime. 2nd, whether it's a violent crime. All right, audience participation time. Who wants to guess what kind of, why am I pointing over there? Please say you point over here. Is that so that you guys can see me and also see me? Oh, that's pretty good. I have a body double. This is great. Anyone want to guess what the single most important factor is? Which current charge is missing? Race? That's an interesting one. Apparently you've been to America. Yeah. Recidivism, great. It is none of those. You might have guessed the current charge, since all of these are current charges. It's sort of a current charge. It's the current charge of having the wrong face. The mugshot is the single most important factor. But this is very misleading. I'm lying to you. I'm lying to you because when I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you might think mugshot matters, so does current charge. No. If I form a new predictor using just the mugshot, when I say mugshot, I literally mean the pixels. I didn't create any features, it's just the pixels of the mugshot. The pixels of the mugshot alone, if I just predict, will this person be released, not using their arrest record, not using just the pixels, that predictor explains about half of the predictable variation in the judge's decision. That's crazy. So now the question comes, what in the mugshot? It's an interesting technical question now, because the algorithm is a bit of a black box. As people, we understand faces, but I need you to tell me what in the face so I can kind of understand what's happening. We kind of have no common language. But when you start building bicycles for the mind, this is where things getting interesting. Now you've got to build something that someone can ride. You've got to say, I'm a person. I need to be able to ride this thing. I can't just have you sit behind a black box. So some of this work is therefore building a communication procedure where the people can talk to the algorithm. That's what we did. That communication procedure is somewhat technical. The consequence of it will be discovered features, but let me give you a sense of it. The algorithm has discovered something, but people are going to name it. How are they going to name it? The algorithm is going to communicate using pairs of faces. It's going to take a single face, and it's going to morph the face in a direction to say, this is how I would change the face to maximally increase chance of jailing. And I'm going to have people, not me, just people in experiments, look at those and start getting a sense. They're kind of communicating through images. So they might look at something like this. They might look at dozens of these. And at the end, they'd say, after looking at this, what do you think mattered? And then we'd go and test if that thing matters. I'm going to tell you two of the features that came out. The first one you can sort of see in this guy. I didn't pick him for this reason, but you can kind of see in this guy. The first feature is well-groomed. It turns out that if you're well-groomed, and I can see some of you in the audience are going to be in trouble, if you're well-groomed, you're much less likely to be jailed. When I say much less likely, I mean something of the order of magnitude, about half of the size of having committed a violent crime or murder, just for shaving and cutting your hair. The second feature, which has actually turned out to be bigger in magnitude, you can see in this photo. These are not real people. These are all synthetic photos. You can sort of see it if you look at this. It's, I think in the paper we call it full-faced, but in my head I call it fat-faced. It just seems wrong to write an academic paper with the phrase fat-faced in it. I don't know why, but anyway, so it's full-faced, fat-faced. Here's an interesting thing about fat-faced. I'm sure the minute you all saw well-groomed, you're like, I know what happens here. Well-groomed means more likely to be released. But which way does fat-faced go? Raise your hand if you think fat-faced people are more likely to be released. Okay, raise your hand if you think fat-faced people are more likely to be jailed. It goes about half. No, I'd say fat-faced has a majority here. If there's one thing we've learned about democracy is that it doesn't always work. Fat-faced is, in fact, more likely to be released. So shave, get a haircut, and eat something. And again, the magnitude of this is on the order of magnitude about half the effect of a violent crime or murder. These are large magnitudes. Why am I telling you this? When you show these results to judges, their response is, oh my God, I didn't know I was doing that. Now, we could spend time automating judges. Many of you in this room, probably all of you, are expert decision makers in some way, shape, or form. The judge is an expert decision maker. Like you, the judge wants to know, what am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? Give me some feedback. We have started the process in what I'm sharing with you of creating for the judge a mirror, a private mirror. They can look at their own past cases and learn about themselves. This is not just specific to the judge. Think of how many experts there are in the world who actually get almost no feedback and certainly no capacity to algorithmically analyze their past decisions. If you're a star sports player, you usually have a coach who sits with you after each game, and you watch each play one by one, review the tape. If you're a judge, I mean, obviously, judging isn't as important as football, but if you're a judge, you have no ability to review the tape. Any expert decision maker, no ability to read the tape. But to me, the mirror is an example, just one example of the kind of bicycles that we could easily start building to great consequences. The judges we talk to are not happy that this is what they're doing, and they want help in figuring that out, learning it, and what they can do about it. So let's go back to this question. We're in 2024. What's the future of work? What's the future of society? I think the most important point in this figure has nothing to do with those questions. It has to do with the thing on top. The idea that we are engaging in a bit of fortune telling, that we're engaging in a bit of prediction. Whenever we ask these questions, people ask us to predict. I think that's entirely wrong because it is not a prediction. It is a choice. We stand at a crossroads today where we have two choices as to how computing will be built out, how AI will go. Will we go in the direction of automation, or will we go in the direction of building bicycles for the mind? It's not a choice. It's not prediction. It's a choice. And what I want to say is these are two very different futures that are ahead of us. Which future do we want? That's the question we should be asking, and how do we realize that future? Now, of course, you might say, that doesn't sound right to me. I feel like we're going to choose this. Why does it feel like we are choosing this? in part because it sometimes makes, in the very recent last few years, it's often portrayed that this is an inevitable consequence of machine learning. I don't think it is. And to see that it's not an inevitable consequence, you kind of have to understand something about how machine learning was developed. There's two components to modern machine learning that we have today. The first is something called the common task framework. Underlying almost every innovation, whether it's in language or in vision, everything, was simple common tasks that many people competed on. So here are a few. The top is called MNIST. It's the hand digit recognition. You'd be given a square and there'd be a handwritten digit, and the algorithm had to recognize what's the digit. Things got more complicated. ImageNet was there'd be an image, and the algorithm had to recognize, is there a dog, is there a cat in this photo? These were all public data sets in which teams around the world competed to then start doing well at these tasks. You've seen one version of this. The protein folding Nobel Prize was a result of a common task. We had big protein folding data sets. But much of the innovation we've had in computer vision was due to this. Deep learning, which many of you are now familiar with, took off because it did very well in both the ImageNet and the MNIST data set. That was the proof of concept. Before deep learning succeeded at these things, there was a lot of discussion as to what would be the right way of doing things. In other words, the common task we have chosen has resulted in the technology we have today. Similarly, these fields took on some ambitious builds, self-driving cars, large language models. And again, that put pressure on the system. So I would argue we are headed here because both the common tasks frameworks we've had and the ambitious builds we've chosen are all automation. What is the digit here? Is there a dog here? Self-driving car, LLM. It's all, we just inadvertently chose a set of things which were automation, which has made it easier for us to have tech that automates. But there's no reason we can't do this for bicycles of the mind. And I think that's the direction we should head in. I think we need to create common tasks. We have to figure out what those are. I think we need to start building ambitious builds. I'll give you one example of an ambitious build. I'm trying to figure out for this audience. I have three here. I will do the top left one. Here would be an ambitious build. When you're a teacher, you really don't know what's going on in a student's head. You don't really have a sense. Say you're teaching math. The one thing you know is they're not getting it right, but you don't quite know what they've misunderstood. It's quite hard as a teacher. You kind of plot around. If you remember learning, it was equally hard from that direction. They're trying to give you an explanation. It's because the teacher doesn't have a map of the maze that the student is walking in. With enough data, could we build a map of the student's mind? For example, if I had data not on what you got right, but the steps you took, could an algorithm do that? We're already having quite some success at that activity. We got a large data set together of the steps students took, and you're finding algorithms can actually get pretty good at, much like with judges and faces, learning things about the kind of mistakes students make, some of which are quite surprising and novel to teachers. So let me just conclude by saying, I tried to find a picture of a skyscraper. This is the only skyscraper I could find. I didn't even know where this is. I put a picture. Does anyone know? No. Anyway, moving along. So the skyscraper here, I put this because this is a tech stack. And the thing about tech stacks, if you're not familiar, is that the further down something is in the tech stack, the harder it is to change. As society, we are building the AI tech stack today. The bottom of the tech stack is going to get harder and harder to change. It's going to be the existing tools right now favor this, and we need new tools. The easy to get data looks like this, and we'll need harder to get data. So that it's going to be harder to do the thing on the right. But I think that's what we should do. I want to make this a call to action. I think this is the future we should all try to choose. I think as academics, we need to start doing things that are more bilingual. What I mean by that is when I did behavioral economics, I tried to summarize all of behavioral economics in one slide. This is my best attempt to do that. I don't know if you guys see why, but this is my favorite slide of all time. We need to be bilingual. I think as academics, we need to combine what we know about people with what we know about algorithms. I think we need to focus on building, which is something computer scientists have done very well. Many people only see the pinnacle of building, like this is a transformer architecture. Many of you probably think the transformer architecture is a consequence of something at OpenAI. Maybe you know a Google paper that came up with it. In fact, the transformer architecture is very much the linear descendant of a ton of academic research. Attention came out of the Bengio lab, neural networks came out of this. The private sector is fantastic at scaling, but academia is where in this sector innovation has happened, and it's happened because computer scientists have focused on building. I think we need to focus on building things. I think that in the work I'm doing, we have a center that we're starting called Tools of Thought at MIT. There are fantastic people at Zurich who are doing this, some of the best people in this. I put some names up who I think are very much in this space. So I think academics need to go. I think philanthropy needs to go in this direction, because I think right now the way philanthropy is focused on is it's sort of focused on defense. Oh, how do we get AI safety? I don't think we should just be doing defense. We should be focusing on offense. We should change the arc to put us on a path towards augmentation. We need ambitious builds for meaningful problems and not just safety of whatever is being built right now. That's also important, but that shouldn't be our sole ground game. And finally, I think in the business world, I would say automation is short-term profitable, but I think strategic opportunities exist that are more long-term for augmentation. In my own work, we have a company called Dandelion that's very much focused on the idea that if we're going to do AI in health, we have to take a different approach. I don't think automating doctors is the way to go. I think it's creating the data needed to do this other stuff. So let me just end on a different note, going back to the skyscraper. Because the software stack is being built up, it's hard to do this now, but it's going to get harder and harder to do this in the future because the automation stack is building up fast. So I think we have a window of opportunity, and that window of opportunity is now, and I think we should take that window of opportunity to build the future we want. All right, thank you.